right, as I mentioned earlier, we're now going to talk about adaptive learning a bit. This panel is the next generation in adaptive and personalized learning. You know, there are a lot of definitions floating on out there about what adaptive and personalized learning really means. You know, it sounds like, oh, well, it adapts and it's personal about me. But there's a lot behind technology these days that can really deepen the whole idea of what you thought about what adaptive and personalized could be. Our moderator today is Kevin Bushweller. He's the Assistant Managing Editor with Education Week. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Kevin. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Really glad to be here. Education Week is covering these issues very extensively. It'll be an interesting conversation because I know we have a pretty sizable higher ed crowd. Ed Week tends to cover K-12, but we also cover higher ed issues related to K-12. Personalized learning is very personal to me because I have 4 kids at virtually all levels of education, from a 4-year college to a community college to high school to my only daughter, who's a 6th grader, so she's in middle school and just moved up from elementary. And I have seen a lot of the struggles that K-12 schools have had in making this work. Now, based on our coverage, digitally driven personalized learning is arguably one of the hottest topics in K-12 and higher education right now. Everyone is talking about it. Schools and universities are trying to integrate it into strategic plans, and companies are touting products and services to support it. The trouble is there is no shared definition of what it really means. What is personalized learning? I don't know, turn to your neighbor. What do you think? What is personalized learning? Are we talking about letting students pursue what they are personally interested in rather than following a standard curriculum? Or simply customizing curriculum to address students' unique strengths and weaknesses? What about something that blends both those ideas? Customizing a standard curriculum but playing off students' interests to raise motivation. That is the challenge. Personalized learning eludes easy definitions. Yet without some kind of shared definition, schools and universities are going to have a hard time sharing best practices with each other or collaborating to scale up what works. Absent a shared definition, schools and universities will be operating in isolation, spinning their wheels because they cannot learn from what has worked or not worked from others. We see this confusion playing out in schools across the country. School districts invest a ton of money in digital devices with the goal of fueling personalized learning, but they fail to first make sure they at least have a shared definition of personalized learning within their institutions. And they underestimate how much training teachers will need to make this new approach to learning justify the heavy investments. If you followed the news this year, the train wreck in the Los Angeles Unified School District over this issue was a case in point. The good news is that a movement is underway to clarify the definition. Driven largely by a group of education foundations, the movement has outlined a very detailed working definition of personalized learning that includes 4 primary pillars: competency-based progression, flexible learning environments, personal learning paths, and learner profiles. In a special report published by Education Week in October titled "Taking Stock of Personalized Learning," we actually took a hard look at the challenges of defining personalized learning, the barriers that get in the way of making it work effectively, and what measures need to be put in place to scale up what works. The report was primarily about K-12 schools, but embedded in the report were very important lessons for higher education too. In the report, Elliot Soloway, a professor of computer science at the University of Michigan, who has studied and developed digital education tools for years, warns what is likely to happen if the personalized learning movement does not embrace clarity and intelligent planning. He said, everybody's saying they're doing it, which is true, But we have to go one level deeper when we say personalized learning, he says. If schools and technology advocates do not set high standards for what they mean, he predicts the movement will, quote, not be sustainable. It will peter out. To make sure that movement does not peter out, I think there needs to be much more sharing of information among K-12 schools and between K-12 and higher ed. To help move that sharing of information forward, we actually conducted an extensive and exclusive analysis for the special report of 16 school districts, educational cooperatives, and charter school districts that receive federal Race to the Top grants to put personalized learning programs in place. We contacted all the school systems for detailed progress reports on how they have used the grant funding and what their plans are for the road ahead. Several of the trends we identified included a big emphasis on the importance of having data dashboards that are easy to use for educators, students, and parents, and having data coaches, either provided by the companies or the district, who can work closely with teachers to improve their use of data to raise student achievement. 2, a growing understanding of the value of online testing and assessment and demand for testing tools that are adaptive and provide real-time data. 3, more use of adaptive curricula that students can work on independently, allowing more advanced students to move to higher levels quicker and less advanced ones to be identified for academic intervention. 4, the importance of having digital learning devices that are embedded with content that can be continually updated. 5, and I have 8 of them, so making sure, so I will finish, but these were very interesting findings for us, and we're going to continue to be digging into this. Making sure students have access to digital content in school and at home. At home is a big struggle for K-12 schools right now. There are a lot of equity issues involved in that. Schools are trying to figure out how to extend learning time, and they see that as a key strategy. Then, a big focus on pre-K to 3. There has been a lot of attention on middle school, high school, and college students using technology, but this analysis revealed a heavy emphasis on the pre-K to 3 crowd and how technology could be used to personalize learning for those children. Number 7, measuring the success of a personalized learning initiative is very complex and not easy at all. But our analysis showed that state test scores remain a key tool for measuring success. I'm actually curious how colleges and universities are measuring success of personalized learning programs, and I would like to hear from the panelists and the audience on that topic, because I think there's a lot of connection here. Personalized learning is a lot of connection between K-12 and higher ed over this issue. Last, number 8, the move toward competency or mastery-based education. This is actually considered a hallmark of personalized learning in the new working definition. But making it work can be tricky. To begin with, it will require states to change seat time requirements for the K-12 system. It seems to me like colleges and universities have a little bit more flexibility to make this concept work, but are they making it work? There was some discussion in one of the previous presentations about that, about students not actually having as much flexibility and other things to make this kind of concept work. Now, our reporting on this issue of personalized learning has showed time and again how it is hitting major bumps in the road that could potentially knock it off course. One of the biggest bumps is the rising tension between personalized learning advocates and people who are worried about protecting student data privacy. Advocates for personalized learning argue that the use of data to identify students' strengths and weaknesses is at the heart to customized learning. But privacy advocates counter that too much sensitive information is ending up in the hands of third-party vendors. We've done a lot of reporting around this, including a big story about Google for Education. Clearly, the two sides need to find some common ground, or the promise of personalized learning might never be realized. So, looking at it from sort of the big picture perspective, though, and I am by nature an optimist, it's probably safe to say that personalized learning, even with the challenges of defining it and the other concerns, is now a movement. But what will happen to that movement? Will its momentum slow or pick up the pace? Well, the answer, of course, is that it depends on several key factors. Chief among them is proof that such efforts raise student achievement and prepare students for the careers of today and the future. Without evidence of impact, spending more money or redistributing resources into new areas to pump up personalized learning efforts will become difficult to justify. Now, we have an outstanding panel today, and they're all going to address these very important issues. We have Christine Geith, who is an assistant provost at Michigan State University and executive director of MSU Global. We have Andrew Smith-Lewis. He is the founder and executive chairman of Cerego. And Cathy Casserly, on the far left there, is the vice president of learning networks at EdCast, Inc. Now, we want to make this as vibrant a conversation as possible and engage you, the audience. The panel will get the conversation rolling, and then we'll open up to questions or comments from you. So if you do have a question in the course of the panel discussion, please raise your hand, and we'll add that question to the mix. So let's get this discussion started. But first, I want to have the three panelists tell the audience in 1 minute or less what you think is the biggest challenge facing the evolution of personalized learning in K-12 schools and colleges and universities. Why don't we start here?
I get to go first. I'm Chris Geith from Michigan State University. I lead a group that's sort of at the intersection of institutional policy and faculty innovation and faculty development. So I have a lot of experience sort of bridging those two gaps with different types of innovation. The biggest challenge, you did a great job outlining the complexity of the problem. It's a wicked problem, right? I think the biggest, if I had to pick one thing that could wreck the movement, and I do think you could probably call it a movement, would be to oversimplify what you're trying to do. Don't oversimplify a wicked problem. It took 19, 20 years, some would say more, for what we now call online learning to cross the chasm and reach the mainstream. And I was recently at a Gates Foundation gathering about personalized learning, where they had survey information about faculty adoption of courseware. The Gates Bryant's group did, of education advisors, similar findings to what you had in your report. And I said, with all of your money and all of your knowledge of how long it took online learning to be adopted, can't we shorten the cycle to maybe 5, 10 years maybe? Could we at least cut it in half? But I think with the biggest issue would be oversimplifying and therefore stalling what has the potential to really transform what we're doing in teaching and learning.
Thank you. Andrew?
I'm Andrew Smith-Lewis from Cerego. Thank you for joining us all today. How many of you now, so Kevin gave a good definition, some explanations about the criteria for personalized learning, 8 different steps. How many of you now have an understanding of personalized learning and could walk out of this room and explain it to a normal human being at CES?
Or yet your mother.
Oh, there's a guy in the back. I saw a hand go up.
We got one. We've got one in the back.
So I think that's part of the problem. I think we need sort of a plain language definition for personalized learning. I think we need a plain language definition for adaptive learning. And being a company in this space, I sometimes I wake up, we're personalized learning, we're adaptive learning. It's sort of buzzword bingo. And I think it's very dangerous, because what happens is these companies start saying kind of whatever they want the flavor of the month. And that confuses the market. It sends a bad signal to people who are using these things, and it also makes it really difficult to define outcomes, to measure these things. Because if you can't define it, how can you really explain what it is? So I think it would be really cool probably 300 of us in this room, if we kind of left the panel today and we had like a plain language definition for personalized learning?
Kathy?
So let me pick up on this thread. So I think when I was thinking about it, I almost was saying, well, maybe I'll give too much of a simplistic answer to what the key challenge is. And the key challenge is the fundamental challenge, I think, upon which everything else is built, which is we really have to put the student at the center.
Yep.
So even before this panel, we're in the back hallway, and we're saying, is it a higher ed group or is it a K-12 group? Who's going to be in the audience? Well, if we actually put the student at the center and think about the student's learning journey, both in K-12, pre-K, K-12, higher ed, whatever that might look like, and their lifelong journey after, we're changing and shifting the whole paradigm. And so I think the biggest challenge is changing the one is changing the mindset, and we can all say that quickly because it's all in the literature. Everything's student-centric, we all know that. But yet the constructs of the environments in which students are learning look very, very similar to 100 years ago. And those constructs haven't then shifted the context to actually put the student first. Whether they're in school or at home or on a field or following a passion or part of a club, they are learning in all those environments. And we learn, this is a learning environment for us today. So how do we capture that kind of learning? How do we think about the construct differently? And so I think there's just this fundamental mind shift beyond just using words that are confusing and not really meaningful. How do we actually change that to where the student is and how they are engaging with their peers and collaborating?
Great, and I encourage you too. Yeah, I don't know who raised their hand back there, said they could define it. Raise your hand again. I'd love to hear what you have to say. But
4 rows down, 3 in, right there. Gentleman from McGraw-Hill.
But we actually kind of joked about it when we were putting together, the lineup for this special report. Well, what is personalized learning? So what kinds of stories should we do? Because the definition was so vague at that point, I think it's starting to come together, and I think that's going to help, and gatherings like this can help. Now, so I have a question for the experts here. Is when I look at, when I think of personalized learning, I think of digitally driven, customized, or adaptive learning. What should personalized learning look like? And try to give as much specifics as you can. Both the kinds of technologies students should be using, how they should be using them. What should it look like? Is this about just kids, trying to pursue what they're interested in, or is it something very different?
So what did you say, digitally driven, adaptive?
Digitally driven, adaptive, or customized learning.
Digitally driven, adaptive, or
Are those the
customized
4 pillars that were in the thing you mentioned earlier?
Well, the four pillars that the group is developing are competency-based progression, learner profiles, personal learning paths, and flexible learning environments.
Hey, it's just what Cathy said. Student at their learner at the middle, right? Learner in the middle.
Yeah, so I would jump on that and say, yes, we need it digitally driven. There's certainly aspects of that, but there's still youth and individuals, and there's a reason we all came here to Las Vegas and are in this room as opposed to sitting at our computer engaging in this webinar. We're all people, so where is the collaboration? Where are the social parts of this? How do we form peer groups and communities of learning? How do we then, with their kids, engage in that passion? And so while there's certainly the digitally driven and the adaptive elements, we still can't forget the kid, the student, the youth at the center, and what engages them and how they will excel in learning. So I just want to pick up on that point and add that in.
Yeah, I'd like to build off what you said. I think one of the barriers to adoption by faculty of the solution for personalized learning isn't that they think it's stupid or not a good idea. They want things that will help students master content, especially in like fact-heavy fields where there's a big body of knowledge of curriculum that you need to learn. Not all fields are like that. Everything has a certain amount of mastery of content knowledge. And in those fields and in those courses and in those programs, having these sorts of tools, it can accelerate students' progress. It can slow it down when they need it to be slowed down. It can speed it up. It can be divergent or convergent depending on the students, what they need at the time. So it gives faculty and teachers and systems tools to customize it, but when it's talked about as unfortunately You do sometimes. Get a little controversy going. When personalized learning vendors come to an institution and talk to faculty about their great solution, and they just zero in on that one little piece, they're not recognizing verbally and explicitly that that's one piece of a whole system of experiences that classrooms and spaces create for good outcomes. It addresses a really important piece that people are looking for solutions for, but it's not the whole thing. The social piece, the collaboration, the social peers, the things that are not in a classroom are important aspects to include as well. It's the balance of those things.
All you need is Cerego. That's all you need. So just,
That's what I was going to ask. Like, I was going to ask, from a technology perspective, again, here at CES, we do want to know about the technology. You know, what is it that helps curriculum become adaptive? What are we using? What would be the ideal to be used? And how do we collaborate and share that? I mean, there is a reason why we have these panelists here. So, you know, what is that technology? How are these things working together? And that might help us get to this definition. But that's what I'm dying to know is, what is the technology? Is it sensors on your head? Is it eye movements? Is it data? What is it?
brain probes. So I was going to pick up on that point and what you said about digitally driven adaptive. I think that you know, personalization, the best personal experience would be to have a personal tutor, to have someone who knows you, who's with you, and that's the way it was for some people many moons ago. You had someone who was with you through your education, who knew your strengths and weaknesses, and who could tailor the type of instruction, what you were interested in, and get it across to you. That's the best experience. And the challenge is, can that be leveraged through smart technology? The adaptive side, so my company at its core makes adaptive tools. We make great tools, and our adaptive tools, and adaptive to me means that you use data and to give feedback and to modify the pace and rate of instruction for an individual. So we've got some algorithms that can figure out what you know and what you don't know, and that core adaptive engine is the power of what we have. But we're an engine maker. I aspire one day to be the Tesla of learning, but right now I make great engines. But I can partner with people who are really providing the full solution, and that's, to me, a more personalized solution. I can partner with an EdCast that has the next generation MOOC platform that can take that engine and create an environment for an MSU that does something awesome, that provides that personalization. We were fortunate enough to get a very generous grant from the Gates Foundation this year to build a personal learning course in statistics where we'll, you know, try the challenge of actually building that world ourselves off these tools. But I think, you know, adaptive is a key component, but it's just one aspect of what's required.
And I just want to jump in on your comment. We're looking for a silver bullet. You're asking, is it the glasses? Is it the brain probe? Is there a silver bullet? We're looking for the silver bullet. And learning is a complex activity. Pedagogical strategies we are still learning from. Right now, we're in a period of inflection. We need to experiment. We need to share the data and knowledge we gain from those experiments. We've set up islands of schools, we set up islands of universities, we set up islands of companies, but how do we actually share that so we keep, again, the student learner at the center? Actually, how do we share collective knowledge? And then we can all take it back to our home institution and adopt it and localize it. But we don't, again, have that mentality of how we do that. And that goes a little bit to the privacy issues around data that we can talk about later. But there has to be this notion of experimentation. There has to be room for experimentation. We have to get away from thinking there's a silver bullet out there, because this is going to take some time for us to figure it out. And we've got some great tools. We've got great organizations who are experimenting. They're making incredible headway. But this isn't just like I'm in a Silicon Valley startup. Just like in a Silicon Valley startup, they don't just plan for a year. Like everyone's like, what's the roadmap at EdCast? Well, there's not a year-long roadmap at EdCast because the environment is changing too quickly. We're an agile team. Every 2 weeks, the engineers are changing based on customer feedback and what we're learning from the data. So how do you actually think about that as we apply, and think about the solution for student learning? So I just think we get ourselves caught in what is the solution, And it's more complicated than that, and we need to experiment, we need to create room for it, and we need to have the resources to be able to do that as well.
And
Kevin, I'm sorry to jump in, just to follow up on that. We have so many higher ed representatives here. So, Dr. Geith, can you share that point about collaboration? Because, that grabbing that technology or using data, I've worked in K-12, I've seen the data also sit in the corner. So, can you share how you're collaborating and sharing information at MSU?
Yeah, we do, as a Big Ten university, we collaborate a lot with our peers in what they call the CIC schools. So there are faculty in different disciplines that are looking at and currently experimenting with solutions for over a decade. We've had in physics, for example, our physics faculty were so interested in creating adaptive exams with science and math for curriculum that they created a piece of software. It's still usable. It's called Lon Kappa. They've turned it into another piece of software called CourseWeaver. They have hundreds of schools and teachers and thousands of students around the world using this open test bank of problems that are adapting to whatever the student needs to do at the time as they're learning, to problem solve with math symbols. So they use it a lot in physics at MSU. But it's not just an MSU product. So we collaborate at a university like MSU. The faculty collaborate along their disciplinary lines across institutions that they consider peers. Okay, there's also more organized, like the type of institution we are as a land grant. So there's like a matrix of ways to collaborate organizationally through disciplines of faculty and types of schools that we consider peers that we benchmark salaries against and we benchmark programming against. And then we create coalitions, islands. Cathy called them islands of experimentation. We do that too at our own school, with our neighbors. But I think faculty, in terms of technology tools that you asked about, and these islands of experimentation, if any of you are on the floor here at CES, have tools that would give teachers insight, not just raw data that's meaningless, but meaningful interpretations of student responses, whether it's passive sensors or if eye tracking could provide meaningful data, assessment, different forms of assessment, things that are a little bit out of the box, passive and active tools to enable faculty to see more of what's going on and what kind of response they're getting. I'm not talking about clickers, okay? Although I suppose somebody probably has a fancy clicker here at CES that I haven't seen yet. We're interested in that. And then with our peers, making meaning out of it in our context. That's the hard part. We need help with that, all right? People don't have time to sit around and make meaning out of open data. That's part of the problem. It's nobody's job in a classroom to analyze the data. We need help. We need services.
And to sort of address what you were bringing up, there's no silver bullet, but we have seen specific technologies that have worked well. So even in higher ed. So a good example is Spanish. There was a student we wrote about who had trouble taking language classes in a classroom. So the student took an online course, and because it was audio that he was using, that he could play back time and again, because he couldn't keep up with the pace of the classroom, but on his computer, he could play the audio back several times, and he did quite well in the course. And so there are, and then at the K-12 level, and I think this is going on in higher ed quite a bit too, this sort of blended learning approach, which maybe you could, address a little bit, where a student, is doing some face-to-face work, but then goes in and uses some of these adaptive technologies or other things to complement, what they're doing with the teacher or the tutor.
Well, I think this morning David Levin did a nice job of answering the question about how it sort of fits in the classroom. I think that the job of good technology should be, at least for the classroom, is to get out of the way of the teacher and to free them up to basically spend their time doing what they love to do, which is teach, and to focus on higher level cognitive things that really are best communicated human to human, and take some of the grudge work out of the stuff that just people need to know. A microprocessor is better at figuring out what you know and what you don't know than one teacher and 30 students. And if we use the microprocessor properly, we can really provide that teacher with a really great benefit and the right data to be a data-driven instructor to really understand how to better modify, her class moving forward.
Go ahead.
I mean, I just want to pick up on what you said and kind of give one real-time, real-life example of some of this model. So part of it, what you're talking was about pacing for the student who had struggled to learn Spanish. Right? In the classroom, we teach to the middle. That's different, right? The teacher has to teach. I was a teacher in a classroom, 45 kids, Kingston, Jamaica, right after I finished my undergraduate in mathematics. No pedagogical training, knew math really well. That was a small classroom in Kingston, Jamaica, so I was lucky, 45 kids, right? And I had kids all over the spectrum. And I was 1 to 45, right? So I had to teach and catch as many as I could and then try to support the others and not bore those who could actually move really quickly. So that's been the challenge. But one of the ways to think about the models differently, so this is an example. So Jeffrey Sachs at the Earth Institute out of Columbia University wanted to teach a course not just to the students at Columbia, but to students who are interested in sustainable development across multiple institutions. So 29 universities are actually taking a class through Jeffrey Sachs and his Earth Institute through using the EdCast platform with their home faculty at their home institution and students enrolled in credit. And the students from the 29 universities are in one big class. And they're in a forum and they engage in conversations. And they're engaging with people in different parts of the country that they wouldn't necessarily have access to. But they also get to have that home conversation with their local students and their local faculty, who the faculty is freed up to really take some of the, kind of the guru context of Jeffrey Sachs and teach it and talk about it locally. And that course doesn't have to be replicated in 29 students by those faculty because it's using a technology-enabled system to do that. And the students can engage in deep and meaningful conversations through social forums. And it's caught, the video is caught. You can go back, hey, I didn't really understand those points. I'm gonna sit around and I'm gonna actually look at that and I need to replay that because that went fast and I didn't really understand that. Or I need a social group. Let's all get together and do that. So we need to kind of think about changing, breaking the context, throwing our elbows out a little bit, breaking down the silos, reimagining what collaboration could look like. So I just wanted to pick up on some of those points because then you can bring in, and you bring in these other tools. The faculties have these freedoms and time that they didn't have before. How do I take it now to really advance my students, my 20 students who are in front of me? How do I really advance their learning?
I think we had a question down here, so I'd love to
Sure.
get the audience involved sooner rather than later.
If we could just, I do have one other point about big data. And Andrew, so does your tool really analyze the data and push that back, or is it handling all data points? Where does technology come and fit in? Is it in the middle? Is it the beginning? Is it all over?
The data comes from the individual. So we're a system. I almost said personalized. Somebody hit me. We focus on we focus on individual data. So we're not taking data from thousands of students and saying, okay, 900 people had problems this way, so we're going to go this way. This isn't sort of a choose-your-own adventure driven by the data, but rather it's collecting tons of data about an individual's interaction and knowing real-time where they are. So it's not just about, hey, somebody got a 90 on a test at some point in time. It's about how did they get there and then being able to predict where they're going with that. And that data provides a lot of benefit to a teacher and institution because the goal should be not just to get people to pass courses, but to have some of that knowledge stick with them so they can use it in the future. And that's something we want to support.
And we're really changing the role of an instructor.
Yeah.
And trying to get that grading papers out of the way, maybe using technology and focusing on what's being learned. And so to your point about the data, how are we getting instructors into okay, you're going to have to be a little bit of a data analyst. How are we doing that, Dr. Geith? What are you doing to encourage them?
Well, we give them a graduate assistant in our context.
Nice. Okay, but that's great. It's good
They
to
need,
know.
labor, student
Yeah.
help. They need help. There's very little about how institutions like ours are organized that enable systematically to support faculty in doing more and more things, and data analysis is one of them. So that's a systemic problem, and I'm wondering if personalized learning actually is an opportunity to not focus on the instructor as the problem, which they're part of a system, but the notion of the class and the classroom. I think that's an even harder box to see and to adjust flexibly to accommodate personalized and adaptive learning, however we define it. I think it's a paradigm that we just take for granted, and I don't think that, I mean, when I talk to faculty, I said we work a lot with faculty at the intersection of kind of where the institution's going and what it's able to support and fund and all that with the faculty interest, and this is a research university and a teaching university. We also do outreach extension, blah, blah, blah. I rarely have a problem with faculty adopting new technology for helping their students do better when it's not in the context of a classroom. When it's in the context of service, internships, job preparation, outreach, study abroad, service learning, yeah, they'll try anything and they're more flexible in their approach. But when I talk about their class, their 3-credit class, poof, poof, the wall goes up, box shows up, and obviously then all my options are limited and resistance goes up.
So how do you change that then?
I think we need, part of our new definition needs to not just be focused on the student, but also explicitly blowing away the notion of the classroom. And flipping it's not enough. Making it online is not enough. We've been doing those things for years. We need to, maybe there's something we can do around that piece to free ourselves to finally unleash what's possible. I don't know, just a notion.
I think it's
Excuse me,
about, sorry, please.
Perhaps a few of my comments will perhaps, help resolve this.
An answer, yeah.
I have an adage, and I am a total believer in the fact that whenever you come across a conflict, check your premises. One or more of them will be wrong. And from that point of view, I started examining, and incidentally, I have been in the teaching business for more than 2 decades now. I've taught engineering, mathematics, business administration, and I'm convinced that, in this particular case, what we are missing is we are focusing too much on tools, digital, CES, or, whatever we are trying to think of, we are focusing on tools, but these are only tools. They are to do something. What is it that we are trying to accomplish? And my approach would be to focus on the strategy and the process.
All right, let's let the panel address that. So
If you could give me just one.
all right,
minute.
make it quick though. We got to move on.
Sure. The process I would define as, what is it that we are ultimately trying to accomplish? Good learning experience for students as well as teachers. How do we accomplish this? We have to have a strategy. What is the strategy I'm suggesting, and I have followed myself, and I'm very pleased with it, that you need to teach students how to learn. You need to teach them, how do I decide this is right?
All right, let's let the panel address that.
Yeah, and
okay?
that's a good question. So can we change the way a student learns?
So my answer to that is student agency. Students need to have agency of their learning. They need to learn it from the very early days, that they have control, that it's meaningful, that they know what they're learning and why, that they see their dashboard, whether it's digitally enabled or not, about how far they're progressing to whatever they're trying to achieve. And that agency will carry a learner through their life, and it's critical and fundamental. And it goes to, I think, the whole student learning aspect.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think, I called myself a tool company, so, we'll talk afterwards about the value of tools. But I think that, there's a lot of buzz in the ed tech space. And people, when I talk to people, they say, oh, you're an ed tech company. And I think ed tech, I don't like the naming because it gets to your point. It's all about the what. People run around with a solution, a what solution, one point. And they're trying to impart information on an audience. They're not trying to teach people how to learn. And I think learning is about that how component. So I like learning technology as the future of where this all needs to go. So I would, partially agree with you there.
Hello.
Okay. I think we have a question in the back.
I wanted to contribute something to the dialogue. I'm Michael D'Angelo. I'm the CEO of mindports.com. We've created a new kind of discovery engine and portal, an interface on the web based upon library science studies in the 1990s, which found that the process of knowledge and learning occurred not when someone achieved a result of obtaining information, but actually was formed along the, along the pathway of discovery. So we have introduced this tool on the web. It's free to use, and it cuts across many of the questions and thoughts of the panel in the sense that it's fully user-controlled. provides both faculty and students with the ability to structure information very rapidly and create portals for themselves and others in order to collaborate and share information.
Thank you. Did you have a question or? Okay, all right.
Sure.
Anyone have a question for the panel? I think we had one over here.
My name is Bo Lebo. I'm an educator and I'm a writer. And I work with advocacy all the time because I work with the ADA. And as somebody who just got their master's and having to speed up to be an ed tech, I didn't find advocacy. I'm also working with, as an adult, with scientists from all over the world. And as of a phone meeting on the way to CES, we ended up talking about how people are protective about either their information or their technology or their ability to go for tenure. So I really wish that you could shake this up a little bit and talk about the wonder of how the mind learns and also about where you're going to get these advocates if the university is not really interested in people who are thinkers. They're more interested in people getting across campus.
Well, what's your name, Bo, was it? Bo, thank you
Bo.
for your comment. Well, first of all, I take issue with universities just caring about people getting across campus. So universities are, I'm not going to defend the university, but I will say, getting back to the gentleman who made the comment over here, it's really easy for us to fall into the trap of focusing on the means, how we do things, the class, the tools, and the gap widens between the tools and the end. So if you go to Michigan State and you look up the Spartans Will, you'll see our Spartans Will campaign. It's our new capital campaign. I've worked there for 15 years. I'm really proud of the messaging about the campaign. Why is that? Because it focuses on what we actually do, what we say we do, our rhetoric, and what our faculty actually care about doing. And that is solving the world's challenges. We are trying to produce communities of people, faculty, staff, students, alums, and their extended families and their businesses that actually go out and solve world problems. That's really the end goal. But in our daily life, just like human beings, the organizations get stuck in how they do it. So I heard a story about how Amway went to China. When they first went, they failed drastically. And when they finally decided that, well, wait a minute, the way we do it is just a strategy. Our goal as a company, the mission is the same. And they dramatically changed their strategy in China so much that you wouldn't recognize it as what we used to call Amway. And they got there because they had strong leadership that broke out of the box of focusing on the means and the tools, and they used those to actually accomplish their mission. But it takes a different way of thinking. And I think the tool providers, like the person that stood up in the back, have really, and you, have really important things to add and important perspectives that can help us achieve those ends. But we need more conversations about our shared endings and our shared goals and how to get there, and ask the question, how can we get to solving the world's challenges, including employment, by using these tools, as opposed to saying, how can I get a faculty member to adopt this in a psychology class? See the difference?
Andrew, let me sort of follow up on that. She's talking about sort of what she needs from you, but what do you need from them when you're working with colleges and universities? How can things change to make it easier for companies to work more effectively?
Good question.
It's a very good question. I think that, driving adoption is a key thing, and I think, the key thing is to figure out how to match what we can offer with what you really need. And a lot of it comes down to the content that you teach. And I see the rubber hitting the road when you look at trying to figure out how to use wonderful technology and get the content that's essential to you into that system in an effective way, and have it be flexible and modular. A lot of publishers do a great job of coming out with thousands of adaptive courses, but they're locked boxes. It's like you get on their bus and you go where they're taking you. But if you want to give, control to the instructors to be able to personalize that, I think there has to be a two-way dialogue where instructors will meet technology companies halfway and kind of say, hey, this is what I really need. This is how I need to customize the content and to have the system work for me. So I think a better dialogue between those instructors and the technologists so that people aren't kind of doing it on their own is very key.
I want to jump.
Can I
go
just
ahead,
jump in on this? So I just want to say that in my most recent past life, I was CEO of Creative Commons. And before that, really helped at Eula Foundation launch the field of open educational resources. So going back to Bo's question and comment, which I love because she's really challenging us, is to say, how do we think differently about sharing? How do we think about the structures that have worked for a long time? You know, anyone who's worked through the tenure process and has achieved a tenure, they should continue to have that. But as we think about the systems going ahead, is that system really serving the public too? When we think about the costs of publishing papers that are then behind locked walls that the taxpayers have paid for because the funding came from NSF and it went back out to an organization and they did the research and that professor had to put it in a published journal to get the reputation to get tenure, but then when my son or I want to actually get and tap that research, I have to pay for it again. So there's a way about what the public pays for, that the public should have access. There's a way to think about curriculum and content and efficiencies, that when we create great content served with public dollars, we can share it and we can use like an open source model. edX is built on top of Open edX. EdCast is built on Open edX. There's a community contributing all sorts of features that any single institution couldn't do alone. And anyone can take that and build on top of it. And that's how innovation happens fast. That's where the velocity can come from. That's where we can really experiment, we can share the data, and we can learn. So I think we have to think about this new model of openness, about collaboration, where, yes, we all need to have a revenue model. There has to be funds that go through the system, in the public and the private, but how do we build the most efficient system to be able to do that? So I just wanted to put that out. Thank you.
That's a fantastic comment, and I did like that from what Bo suggested. The idea of openness needs to be in higher education and as industry. Is it a private good or a public good? For the part that's a public good using public money, having policymakers that give you the money require you to open up your results of what you create, your publications, your data, and so on. I think we need more progress there. But we also need to, as the private good part of education, define a pre-competitive space, like they do this in the food industry for food safety. They've defined, to a certain extent, food safety as a pre-competitive space. And when the industry gathers together, they share insights and information. They don't share everything. But they've defined it in a way that enables them to share more broadly. And maybe we need a similar model in between higher education and K-12 and workforce development and vocational that's defined as the pre-competitive space for sharing, so we can accelerate our progress together and not get hung up in all these proprietary competitive notions.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a question right there.
Hi, my name is Matt Bernecki. I'm an educational researcher here at UNLV. And Kevin, you initially focused us on a model where we describe personalization as competency-based data, tools and environments, personalized learning paths. But we haven't yet talked about the learner profiles piece of it. And I'm curious, because I work with companies who do the competency-based adaptive instruction pretty well, but their current struggle seems to be how to personalize the students' goals and motivations and their personal interests as they deliver instruction. So I'm curious what the panel thinks about how we should include these varieties of more non-cognitive or non-competence data in learner profiles, and where we kind of adapt our technologies to accomplish that efficiently.
Yeah, I'd like to know the answer to that question too.
So I'll just jump in quick. I mean, the way the EdCast thinks about it in the social forum is really thinking about how the individual student engages with the content. And it isn't necessarily, and it can be about what they like. Do they like video or text? Do they often go into those chats that are long and really engage in a conversation? Do they throw a comment out into the forum that gets really a lot of thumbs up, so they're really a cognitive leader? Are they asking questions that no one's asking and no one else can answer, right? So some of those things can bubble up through AI, and we can capture that so that when Chris comes onto the forum, she doesn't have to bubble through all that chatter, and some of that chatter is good and some is not, but we can actually surface what's meaningful. And so it's both a combination of what's happening as a dialogue, but what I personally am interested in, and how I interact content, because I tend to be a person who watches more videos as opposed to text-driven. So there's ways that we're experimenting with that and really trying to glean from the data about how to individualize for each student.
I want to expand on that question. So in a typical classroom, it's all about mastering the curriculum, right? Somebody else's work. And there's ways to individualize that experience like Cathy described. And in other things like internships and study abroads and service learning, they're much more experiential. They're designed to achieve what we call institutional learning outcomes or maybe programmatic learning outcomes as opposed to course, content outcomes. And that's where I think there's more opportunity to take in this other data as part of the profile for customization. But I haven't seen yet, maybe there's some solutions here, linking that experiential learning profile with the actual classroom, where those things blend would be interesting to see. I haven't seen that yet.
We just to address your question, we did a story about a company called Newton that's gathering millions of learner profiles, and they're, they see it as the key to doing this right, but they're running up against what I mentioned earlier, concerns about student data privacy. So, but I'll touch base with you afterward, and I can tell you where to get that story, because I think it's a very extensive story, and a lot of nuances to it. So you might want to take a look at it.
Could I ask so I'm not trying to point you out, but you said you actually had a working plain language definition of personalization. Could you share it with us?
I mean, I would say it's the information a student needs when he or she needs it, in the way he or she needs it.
I like that. That sounds like the guy's product in the back.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I like that. So sort of spinning on that, I think it's sort of, it's about you. It's got to be centered around the user. It's anytime, anywhere, maybe any pace. And also, I think it needs to be open, and there has to be an open and collaborative environment for that to happen. But I think that's a very good working definition in plain language that my mother would understand.
I'll make it even more simple. The personalized learning is the learning fit my need. So, Joe
Learning
from
fits my need.
Sacramento State University. I'm a faculty there. And my question for the panel is, I want to hear more about the economics of the online learning. Andrew mentioned before the personalized learning years ago is the personal tutor, but we all know that's too expensive. The society couldn't afford it to do the mass education for the elite. Maybe it's okay. So I was thinking using the technology, the one goal or one product should be the economics of scale. And Cathy mentioned a little bit. I know your dissertation is about economics of education, so I want to hear more about the lowering costs of online education for the personalized learning. Thanks.
So I have some thoughts. As you might guess. I think, okay, so we have a structure that has emerged from over 400 years ago, when individuals used to go to monasteries and be the few learned individuals who were part of the society who had access to education. That was the model where we began. And then we created universities, and the universities have developed, and we have public and we have private universities. And we have now the emergence of, and the classrooms that began to, achieve more versions of scale. Like when I think about the Lodge Lecture Hall, and when my youngest son, I'm taking him around for college tours, and one of the first questions is like, how big is the Lodge's lecture hall? Because like the 300 or 400 size hall for the intro engineering courses may not be the best experience. And the reason those lecture halls exist wasn't because of pedagogical reasons. Like they didn't get created for pedagogical reasons. Those were economies of scale. That's why they were created, right? So now we have this whole new way to think about online learning. We have gurus who can share content. And it doesn't have to be any individual, but we keep teaching the same lecture. I taught math. Algebra hasn't changed in 40 years. And we have individual teachers across this country and in community colleges teaching algebra, calculus. And we're doing an individualized approach. It would have been far better for me to go into that classroom in Jamaica and pull on a guru, master teacher. And then I could walk around and actually engage with those students individually. So there's a few things happening. We now have the internet. We now have the distribution systems. We now have ways to facilitate learning in a much more economical way, which doesn't mean we're going to get rid of higher education. It doesn't mean we're going to get rid of faculty, but we can change the notions of how they're used. And I actually think we can change free faculty up to do what they do best and what they love. They love research. They love working with students in an individual way, and they love writing. Some of them have come to learn lecturing as a love, but we don't need that necessarily in that forum. And we have now economies of scale, but we haven't changed the system. And I think to Bo's point, thinking about just the publish mechanism and how we identify tenure is an antiquated system, right? So let me just give one quick example. Rich Baranek, Rice University, digital signal processing, textbook, someone came to him and said, we want you to write the textbook on digital signal processing. He knew by the time he wrote it, and this was early 2000s, it would be out of date. So he said, I'm not going to write a textbook. I'm going to create an online system, which was Connections and now CK12, and now is OpenStack. And what he did was he said, I want to keep it real time. I want to make it out to the public. It's going to change, right? We have new ways. And when he went in for tenure as a young faculty, he didn't say I published so many articles X, Y, and Z. I'm sure he had done that as well. But he said, my content has been translated into 22 languages and downloaded by 25 million people across the world. Those are the new metrics of today, and we haven't yet figured out how to bring them into the system.
We have a question in the back.
I'm Peter Smith from Open College at Kaplan University. And Christine, to your question, first of all, Cathy, I totally agree with you about the economics. It's all about the forms we choose. And we'll talk about what we're doing about that a little later on. In terms of experience, using experiential learning in a classroom format and combining it, if I understood what you said, right. We see a way to do that, and it is all based on what Peter Ewell would call assessment of evidence. It doesn't matter to us where the evidence comes from. Does it come from directed learning? Does it come from experience? Does it come from informal learning? What matters is that it's valid, it's appropriate, and it can be and it fits it within the hierarchy. And if you do that within a modularization of the curriculum or amongst separate learning outcomes, some can be met in a traditional way, some can be met in a different way, and some can be met with experiential learning. What matters is the assessment and doing good, rigorous, validated assessment.
Right, I 100% agree. And that, I think, is the key to answering the business model question, variety. Because there's an example in Oakland of a university called Patton University, and it is now so low cost with online and direct assessment that they don't even need Title IV financial aid. Like if you look it up online, it's something like $500 a semester or something. And they've really maximized that model for the curriculum that's sort of content mastery. They also have campuses. I need to dig deeper to see what they're doing there. But that key means you can see more differentiation across the learning experiences packaged as products that some are premium price, like the individual guru, working elbow to elbow with Jeffrey Sachs, that should cost you more than a typical 3-credit class. They shouldn't even call it a class. It shouldn't even be in the course catalog. It should be premium product. Studying abroad and all the different things that happen from the serendipity of not being in your home environment should be a premium price product, not an invisible add-on that you don't even hear about until you arrive on campus. It should be a separate product as part of an ecosystem of experiences, some premium priced and some really free and open, and some maybe service added. So all the talk and examples of unbundling and direct assessment, it all does come down to what Peter said, which is the ability to gather data from qualitative and quantitative, understand it, make meaning out of it in the context of your institutional learning goals, your program learning goals, and your course learning goals. That's kind of the system. And if you have that framework, you can reinvent your business models and your pricing and your tool set.
We have, I think we're running a little bit over, but we started a bit late, so we're going to have one more question, Kevin, right here.
Hi, I'm just curious, in all the data that you've analyzed, are there perhaps 3 or 4 variables, data variables that you found are predictive of success and perhaps account for, say, 80% of achieving mastery or success? Or do you think that the answer's still out there, that we have to tag every single data point, whether it's the content, the day part, etc., and we need to do an awful lot of modeling to find that elusive answer as to what is predictive? So are there 3 or 4 variables, and if so, what are they? And if not, is the answer still out there?
I would just start with saying the question's a little bit hard because what is success that you're asking about? Is it course success? Is it module success? Is it employment success? But in a larger context, I would say that we know students, for the acquisition of knowledge to happen, students have to be engaged. So so you can look at data around student engagement. Are they on the online forum? Are they participating? Are they reading the curriculum? Are they checking their schedule? Are they logging in? We also know in the first 3 weeks, if you're thinking about a course, if the student isn't engaged actively in that period, the probability of success is extraordinarily low. So there's data points that you can pick up very early in a student's success. And then how much they're actually contributing is another. Not only are they a passive participant, but are they also contributing in a very active way? So I just throw that as a few, but I think my colleagues might have others.
For us, the data we're most concerned with is memory strength. That's what we're measuring on a very granular basis. How well does someone know it? And we use that data to predict how long they'll be able to perform with that information in the future. What we've seen that focus on that memory data do is drive other metrics such as engagement and retention. So in our early collaborations with edX, we saw courses that were powered by Cerego went from the traditional elusive 5%, which is a bogus number anyway, 5% completion to over 12% completion. And we saw instructors starting to use our data as the grading standard. So, we zoom in on one particular thing, which is memory strength, and that's been a really great number for us to focus on.
Christine, do you want to end it?
Yeah, I'll just say, it's to get back to your original problem, it's context specific,
Yeah.
based on the goal you're trying to achieve. And I'll end it there.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you very much. I always say these discussions are really based on the quality of the panel and the quality of the audience, and both the panel and the audience was high quality. So thank you very much.
Thank you all. Thank you.